pulses were not captured. There were no allowances made for icing conditions. So based on my experience in Mars Hill, where people are suffering out to 3,500 feet for a ridgeline arrangement is clearly no good if you are downwind of those turbines. My preference would be to have it at a minimum of twice the Mars Hill distance for ridgeline arrangements for 1.5 megawatt turbines, which brings us to about 7,000 feet, or pre-construction sound modeling that results in 55 dBA either at the property line or at your home, whatever there are legal issues between those two, whichever is greater.
I have a question that sort of pulled up because it's a related one. It feels like it fits here. I live approximately a mile from a proposed wind turbine project. The site of the project is a natural amphitheater formed by high ridge lines on three sides, such that the voices of horseback riders that routinely use the area can easily be heard at my house from over a mile away. Wouldn't the same amplification effect apply to wind turbines circumscribing the ridge line of the natural amphitheater?
That's a question that I'm not able to answer, frankly. You want to take a chance?
Sure. Terrain is critical, and I've looked at this enough to know that the local geography is critical and has to be taken into account. Whether there's snowpack on the mountains, whether there's icing, whether it's a river valley, all of these things have effect. So your best bet is to make sure that whoever does the pre-construction sound modeling takes all these things into account and does not use an off-the-shelf modeling program, because that may result in that may end up with something that you're really not happy with.
A different front. Can you contrast the evidence for health impacts from utility-scale wind farms to the evidence for health impacts from the various other forms of energy production? Respiratory disease from coal plant emissions, mines, waste facilities, etc.
Well, let's go through that. That's a very good question, actually. Coal, you have to take it out of the ground, so coal miners, of course, suffer some risk of acute injury as well as perhaps death. Coal miners, of course, are at risk of black lung disease. And then, of course, coal, and I didn't realize how much coal we use in this country. I was at a meeting at the Massachusetts Medical Society last week, and someone made a presentation that we in this country, if you string coal cars consecutively back and forth on one another, will actually go around the world 4.5 times as amount is reflective of the amount of coal that we use in the U.S. If any of you have any experience with respect to particulate emissions from coal, it's well acknowledged of emissions for asthma, cardiopulmonary disease, and so forth being associated with particulates in the atmosphere, primarily from coal-fired power plants. None of us need to be reminded about potential health implications and environmental consequences of oil in light of the tragedy that's in the Gulf of Mexico right now. Moreover, not only it's the oil spills that we have to be aware of, but also when oil is burned, there's also air pollution that can present adverse effects. It's hard. I haven't seen any direct comparison between potential health effects of wind turbines and oil and coal that I just mentioned. Clearly, nuclear is another matter with the potential for accidents and storing nuclear waste.
I guess the question really assumes that wind will, at some point in time, be able to significantly replace any of these sources of energy, and that's certainly a matter that anyone can investigate and look into. I know that some preliminary calculations were done in Maine when the governor first announced his plan to generate 3,000 megawatts of wind energy, and it turns out that the carbon benefit of all those 3,000 megawatts, which would translate to about 300 miles of ridgeline, would be wiped out in about 10 days of energy, 10 days of carbon output growth in India and China. So it's a difficult argument to make.
What would you tell a patient who presents with symptoms of annoyance, stress, reduction in sleep, depression, etc., as to how you would explain their symptoms and how you treat them?
Well, first and foremost is trying to understand the nature of the symptoms in some detail. And then fundamentally, I'm sure Dr. Nissenbaum does the same thing that all doctors do. And number one is you formulate a diagnosis, and then you develop the treatment for that diagnosis. And the third exercise is really trying to determine the cause of the symptoms and the diagnosis. So I think first and foremost, because we're dealing with nonspecific symptoms that was just read as part of the question, sleep disturbance and a variety of other factors, is to try to fully understand the nature of the symptoms and treat them, and then try to determine what the cause may be. The cause may in fact be from wind turbine noise, quite frankly. But I think one really needs to explore the potential cause and treat accordingly.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. I'll just say when a patient tells you that I got woken up at night by a wind turbine noise, it's probably a good idea to believe them.
The Peterson study is based on a 600 to 650 kilowatt turbine. How would noise levels increase out of a 3.0 megawatt wind tower, and what effect would there be when these are lined up on a ridge line versus scattered on level ground?
Clearly, the higher the power output, the more the noise there's going to be. And as Dr. Nissenbaum indicated, terrain will have a lot to do with how that noise is transmitted, as well as the vibration associated with the noise.
I had a physicist do a rough calculation for me, and he said if you have a wind turbine with a nameplate power of 1.5 megawatts, generally electric generators operate at about 50% efficiency, he told me. So if it's functioning at peak capacity, it's actually collecting about 3 megawatts of wind power and converting it into 1.5 of electricity. So where is that other 1.5 megawatts going? And some of it is clearly going into heat in the motor and so on, but I would bet a fair amount of it is going into noise, but that's a very good question.
The World Health Organization recently released European guidelines for noise levels at night after reviewing studies. They recommended average levels not exceed 45 dBA, with the ideal level being 30. The Vermont Public Service Board standard for wind farm noise levels is 30 in the bedroom, measured at the peak hour per year, which is more stringent than the measurement used by the World Health Organization. What is the risk of sleep disturbance for a wind farm that complies with the Vermont Public Service Board standard?
I mean, you can take a look at the Peterson studies that tried to look at the noise levels and the percentage of people who were annoyed and reported sleep disturbance. There's no question that as the noise levels increase, more and more people report sleep disturbance. As I indicated earlier, sleep disturbance, if it's chronic, can lead to adverse health effects. There's no question about that. I don't know how, other than doing the studies that we just indicated today, that we went over today, how you would know what percentage of people would report sleep disturbance based on certain noise levels. But there's no question that as the noise levels increase, particularly above 40 decibels, more and more people will report being annoyed and having sleep disturbance.
I didn't catch exactly how the statute is written in Vermont.
It's the Vermont standard is wind farm noise levels be 30 decibels in the bedroom, measured at the peak hour per year. Not sure exactly what that means, honestly.
Right.
Which is more stringent. So it's 30 inside the bedroom at the peak hour.
My rough understanding of what has gone into, let's just say, what has gone into sound modeling in Vermont is that averaging is allowed. And I don't know if averaging is allowed because the Environmental Protection Bureau here allows for averaging in terms of noise, but clearly if you're allowed to average the peak noise, you're going to end up with problems, because averaging will pick times where the turbine is not loud or perhaps not even running, and it'll average it with times when it is running. So you got to look very carefully at these things.
I apologize for offering another comment, at least with respect to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, or as we call it, OSHA, which is part of the Department of Labor and oversees workplace enforcement of standards. There's two